guys, so today I'm doing a quick wrap-up video. Now I'm not going to be doing all the books that I've read from my last book video on my other channel to like the current time that it is right now. I'm only going to be wrapping up the books that I read from the last video that I did up to December, and then I'm going to do January and February together in its own wrap-up. So these are all books that you guys haven't seen me wrap up yet, and this is just kind of me trying to merge my book content from my other channel onto this channel. It's kind of weird right now, but I'll catch up, trust me. So these are just, I think I have 10 books from my last book video, and I actually uploaded the last book update video onto this channel, so I will link it in a card up here. I think it's this side. Is it this side? This side? So these are 10 books that I read since the last video, and I actually got a lot of books from the library this time around, so I actually don't own a lot of the books that are going to be in this video, but I'm still going to talk about them. So the first book is Roomies by Christina Lauren, and you guys know that I'm like a huge Christina Lauren fan now. After reading Josh and Hazel, which is one of my favorite books of last year, I love Christina Lauren. I just think they're such a fun, fluffy little author duo, and after I read like a lot of heavier novels or like big epic fantasy novels, I love picking up a Christina Lauren because they're so easy to read and they just give you all the feels, and I love them. And Roomies was actually pretty good. I didn't like it as much as Josh and Hazel, but I did enjoy it. So basically this book is about a guy who is street musician. He plays music on the streets, and then there's this girl who is the main character. She works in Broadway, and they're actually looking for a musician to kind of fill this spot, and she loves this musician, the street musician. She actually takes a weird route every single day to work so she can watch the street musician, and when she thinks about this guy, she's like, this man would be perfect to fill this role in this Broadway performance. So she goes and she asks him if he wants to work for this Broadway show. He says yes, but to do this they have to kind of fake a relationship, fake a marriage. I like fake relationship tropes. I think it's really fun. I think it's really interesting. I love to see how relationships develop in like the fake relationship trope. But one thing that I didn't love about this novel is it felt a little bit long for what it was. There were certain parts of this novel that I was just kind of like bored at times. I didn't love the Broadway aspect of this story, and there was some scenes where she was in her job, kind of doing her job a lot, and I felt like those scenes were a little bit boring at times, which I guess that's just like an opinion thing. Not everybody would feel that way, but for me, I just wasn't that interested in that part of the story. But overall, I did like it. There's a little bit of like miscommunication at the end of this story, which I hate. It's like one of those situations where you're like, if you would just talk to each other, like you could solve all of these problems. It wasn't too bad though. It was kind of purposeful. I really liked how the author tried to make the main character a strong female, especially near the end. She didn't make the female like rush into a relationship or feel like she needed a man or anything like that. She really had her go through like this self-discovery and self-growth, which I really liked in this book. I thought it was really well done, and it kind of showed the importance of like loving yourself before like jumping into a relationship with a guy to kind of make yourself feel important or valid, if you know what I mean. So I really like that about this. But one thing that I have to say, I'm curious actually if other people feel this way about books sometimes. Please comment down below if this happens to you ever. But I didn't like the main love interest in this, not because he was a bad person, but because I pictured him in a way that I didn't like. So I have this pet peeve in books when an author introduces a character, especially a main character in the story, but they don't explain what this character looks like, so you kind of have to like create this character in your head based on like no description. When I do this, I cannot change the character that I create the moment I create the character. It's like stuck in my head for the rest of the book. Like I could think of a blonde character and then later in the story it'll come out that the character has black hair, and I still can't picture the character with black hair. And when she introduced Calvin in this book, I got this like image in my mind and I couldn't unsee this image, and it made me kind of like not love the character. But it wasn't because of the writing. He was a perfectly fine character, but it was like my own mental image of this character that made me not like him as much as I could have. I don't know. Am I the only one that does this? Because it's so annoying. But anyways, I gave Roomies 4 stars. I liked it. I thought it was fun. It was enjoyable, but it was just a titch long, I would say, for my taste, you know? So the next book is a book I got from the library. It's called The World's Shortest Stories, and this is a book that I just randomly picked up, and I started reading it, and I was instantly engrossed in this book, like in the library, and I was like, I have to check this out because obviously I'm enjoying this while I'm standing in the library. And this book is basically a whole bunch of stories that people wrote that are like under 50 words, I believe, and this book was so fun to read. If you're looking for something really different, I highly recommend this if you guys can find it at the library. I found so many interesting stories in this book, and the thing that I loved the most about this book was the fact that I was so inspired after reading it, which I love to be inspired. It is literally what I live for, is being inspired. If somebody or something can inspire me, I absolutely love it, and this book inspired me. Like, I have written poetry before and all sorts of different things, but this book actually challenged me to write my own short story under 50 words, and I feel like I did a pretty good job. Like, I wrote some really good short stories. And the thing that was really cool about these short stories is even though they're under 50 words, like super duper short, a lot of them have twists or like hidden meanings or things that you kind of have to think about, and so you spend more time on each story than you expect to, and I really liked that because it challenged me to write these 50-word stories and kind of make them like speculative or like kind of a twist in like such a short amount of time. It was really fun, and I highly recommend this book. It was just a really cool read if you're looking for something really different. I wrote in my Goodreads review one of my favorite stories. It was actually like the first story in the book, and I give you an example of what the story looked like. So you guys can go check out my Goodreads review. Maybe I'll put it on the screen if you guys want to read it, but it gives you a good idea of kind of what the stories look like. But I gave this book 4 stars. I think I gave it 4 stars. So the next book is a graphic novel called Grimoire Noir, and I saw this book at the library. So the thing that drew me to this book was the artwork. The artwork was absolutely stunning. So I'm an art junkie, like love art so much, and I would say after Monstrous, this book probably has the best art I've seen in a graphic novel. So this book is about a boy and his younger sister goes missing, and he basically wants to figure out what happened to his younger sister, where she went, if somebody kidnapped her, and he has this friend who is a witch. All the females in this town are witches, and his friend can like float around. Like, she doesn't have to walk, she can just float. And there's this coven of witches, and his mom, I think, has powers as well, so she's crying because her daughter's missing, and the town is constantly raining because that's her power. So as soon as she stops crying, it stops raining in the town. It's really interesting. It has some really interesting concepts. But I have to say, I wasn't super impressed with this plot line. I gave it 3 stars. It was good, but there was something missing. I couldn't connect super well to the characters. I couldn't connect really well to the plot line. I kind of felt like it was a little muddled and discombobulated at times. I was just kind of like unsure of where it was going. Like, I was a little confused on the characters and things like that. I do think like if they came out with a second book or, you know, a series in this world, I think I would be open to reading it. And I think the reason why I wasn't connecting to the characters so much is because it is a graphic novel, and I feel like with graphic novels sometimes it is harder to connect to characters because you're not getting that really deep, like long-winded connection to these people. You know, they have to condense it. So that was the only thing. But if you are an art nerd and you love art, check this novel out just simply for the artwork because it is stunning, and if they do come out with a second one, I'll definitely pick it up. So the next book is a book that I already talked about in my most disappointing reads, and that is The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. And like I said, I gave this book 2 stars. Wasn't a fan of it. It started out really strong, but just kind of went downhill really, really fast. It kind of went from interesting factual information about octopuses to like this woman's story and how octopuses affected her and how it affected her emotions and her spiritually, and kind of like her life journey through her love of octopuses. There were certain aspects, you guys know I love animals, and there were certain times in this book where I didn't feel like they were treating these octopuses the way that they should. I felt like they loved these octopuses, but they also saw them as like things to a certain degree. It wasn't about the facts necessarily, but more about her thoughts about octopuses, what she thought of them, her feelings about them. And I don't know, I just was not happy with it, and I wouldn't recommend this. I just didn't think it was very good. So the next book I want to talk about is a book that I actually have the physical copy of, and that is Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. So you guys know that I read Strange the Dreamer, and I freaking adored it. It was fantastic. Loved that book, loved Laszlo, loved everything about it, gave it 5 stars. I gave this one 4 stars. This one to me wasn't as good as Strange the Dreamer, but it was still good. The only downside to this novel was the pacing. Now, Strange the Dreamer was slower, I can admit that, but it was not so slow that at times it was like, okay, come on, like I'm ready for this to like move on or be over. And by the end of this book, I will admit to feeling like I was ready for this book to be over. Like it was just so long at times. And I think part of the problem was the fact that like the first, I would say 3/4 of this book takes place in like a 2-day time frame. And this is not a thin book. And so 2 days for 3/4 of this book, like there's a lot of drawn out moments, and it's a lot of like dialogue and talking, and I don't know, it was just felt a lot slower than Strange the Dreamer did. And the other thing I didn't love is I didn't feel that connection between Laszlo and Sarai in this book like I did in Strange the Dreamer. Now I know that that is an unpopular opinion because I think that a lot of people actually liked Laszlo and Sarai in this one, but I just didn't feel that connection, and I don't know why, but I wasn't feeling like those feels that you feel, you know, with like a romance. It just was not there for me. But one thing that I loved about this novel, which totally surprised me, was Cora and what was her name? Nova? So these characters are brand new to this world, and normally I do not like when brand new characters are brought into books because I just don't have any connection to them. I usually am just like, I don't care about you, like I want to read about these other characters that I already have a connection to, you know? But these characters, like if there was a book completely dedicated to Nova and Cora's story, I would have 100% read it because I loved those 2 characters and I loved their story. If Nova and Cora weren't in this book, I don't know if I would have liked this story as much. I mean, obviously they're a big part of it, but I love their story. And so I was really impressed by Laini Taylor's ability to get me interested in these characters after not having them in the first book, because that is incredibly rare for me. So props to that. But yeah, I liked this book. It's still very dreamy, very whimsical, and very, very beautiful. Like I have to give her props for her ability to create this freaking world. Like Laini Taylor is a talented writer. I just think that this could have been shortened slightly, you know? So yeah, 4 stars. I could have maybe given this 3.75, but I think I rounded it up to 4. So yeah. So this next book was actually a book that I found when I was searching on YouTube. So something that I do sometimes is I search favorite books of all time, or my top 10 favorite books, or just anything related to that, and I will click on like random YouTubers videos. I won't even know who they are, and I'll watch their videos to try to find books that I should read that are really, really good. And I found this one girl, and she recommended this book. This is called Dangerous Girls, and this is by Abigail Haas. And she said that this book was amazing, and she was raving about it, and I was like, I'm gonna try it out. I'm gonna try that book. For some reason, something was calling me to read this. So I ordered it on Amazon and decided to read it. Now, this book is a mystery thriller, and it's about this group of friends, and in this group of friends there's like 2 kind of lead main characters, and this group of friends decides to go on a tropical vacation to like Bora Bora or something, I can't remember, and one of the girls gets murdered on this vacation. And so this book basically takes place in the courtroom, and all of the friends in this circle of friends are getting interviewed and what's the word? Not interviewed, but they're in court, getting like on the stand, getting interviewed. What's that word? Why can't I think of that word? And what I loved about this book was how it was structured. So in this book, they're in the courtroom getting interviewed, each character, and then after the interview and after they answer the questions, they go back in time to the actual events and how they took place. So you can see how the characters that are on the stand answer the questions, see what they, you know, over-exaggerate or under-exaggerate, or they don't get the facts completely right, or they don't maybe tell the complete truth, or they make assumptions, and then you go back in time and actually see how the event actually played out. And so you can kind of see how, you know, words can get skewed or assumptions can be made, and that was so interesting. And one thing that I can say about this is this book is almost 400 pages, but this book did not feel long at all. Like, I feel like I flied through this book so fast. There was no dull moments in this book. I felt like I was so invested, and I felt like I flew through this book for being an almost 400 page book. So I think that's a really good sign when you feel like a long book is shorter than it actually is. So I really, really liked that. The only thing that I can say about this book, I gave this book 4 stars, is it's predictable. I predicted it, and I feel like not everybody would predict it. I think it's one of those things where you either will or you won't. It just depends on like where your mind's at while you're reading it. But I feel like she picked a tropey twist, if that makes sense. But even though it was a tropey twist, I still thought it was really interesting and really well done, and I was still totally like into it, even though I kind of predicted it to a certain degree, if that makes sense. So even though that was the case, I still really recommend this. I just wish I would have been maybe a little bit more surprised. Like, I saw it coming, if that makes sense. But I do highly recommend this. I think it was really good, and I think it was a really enjoyable story, and I was invested through the entire book, and I didn't get bored through the entire thing, so I highly recommend it. So the next book is a book that was recommended to me by a YouTuber that's actually not a booktuber. She's in the beauty world. What's her name? SMLXO, or Stephanie Lita. She read this book and she loved it. She said it was so cute, like the cutest romance that she's ever read, and so I had to pick it up because I love a good romance. And I have never read Colleen Hoover. This is my first book by Colleen Hoover, and I know Colleen Hoover is sometimes really disliked, but sometimes she's really liked. So I wasn't really sure how to feel going into this novel, but I went into it with a complete open mind, and one thing that I can say starting this off is I was invested in this story. And I want to say that because I think that it's really important to understand that you can be invested in a story even though there's problems within the story. This is basically about a girl who wants to move to New York to follow and kind of pursue her acting career. And so she meets her dad at this diner to kind of tell him goodbye and say, I'm packing up tonight, I'm leaving in the morning, I'm moving to New York. And while she's at the diner, she ends up meeting this guy, and they end up hitting it off, and they kind of make this deal. They're gonna meet each other every single November 9th from that point on, and they weren't gonna have any interaction between each November 9th. So they would go a whole entire year without talking, and then on November 9th, they would meet at the diner and kind of see what would happen, and then they'd go another year and then meet at November 9th, and that's the storyline. And I thought that was the most interesting sounding plot line ever. I was just really interested to see like what the author was going to do with this plot line, because it was just very creative to me, and it had me curious, you know? I enjoyed this novel and enjoyed hearing these two characters' story so much, but that still didn't take away the fact that I was skeptical AF at the beginning of this book. So one thing that bothered the crap out of me was the main character, I think his name is Ben, I'm pretty sure, yeah, Ben. He was super sleazy. So this first day that they met, Ben was like incredibly curious and infatuated with the color of her panties. And this is the first day that they meet, okay? They only interact for one day before she leaves to New York. And I swear like 5 times in this novel, he thinks about or talks about the color of her panties. Like, he wants to know what the color of her panties are. So she takes him to her house, and he meets her roommate. And one of the first things that he says to her roommate is, I just want to know the color of her panties. A little weird, but we'll go with it. And then they decide to go to dinner. And he says, I want you to wear that dress. And she's like, I don't really want to wear that dress. He goes, I want you to wear that dress because I really want to look at your cleavage during dinner. And again, I'm like, what? Why? Why did she write him as such a freaking sleazeball? Like, if I met a guy that was obsessed with the color of my panties and wanted me to wear a certain dress that I didn't really want to wear because he wanted to look at my cleavage at dinner, I would be like, you are freaking weird. No thank you. But apparently she didn't mind it. And then their romance was so insta-love, it wasn't even funny. Like, it was beyond insta-love. Usually I can kind of forgive insta-love. It's not something that really bothers me that bad. Like, I can get over it. But this insta-love was too insta-lovey for my taste. It was a little bit too unbelievable. And there was another really problematic scene in this novel where she says stop loud and clear. She says stop, I don't want to do this right now, but he just keeps on going with all these sexual things, and it was like jarring. It was kind of like a very problematic scene wrapped up in a nice package with a bow, and you're just like, ee. But I know that the author, I think, edited that out in future prints, so I don't think that that scene is in future prints of this book. It was that problematic that she actually had to go back and edit it out, so that was a little bit weird. But with all of that said, you guys, I know you guys are gonna be so surprised to hear that I freaking was invested, man. Like, with all of these problems that I felt during this book, I still was invested. So I could not give this book lower than 4 stars because I was that invested. I wanted to know what was gonna happen. I was really invested in these characters, and sometimes you like a book, even if it's problematic, you can't lie to yourself and say, I didn't like it, because I did. I don't know. So the next book I read was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bleep. Now I'm gonna say bleep because I don't want to get demonetized. So this book is a self-help. You guys have all seen this book. I gave this book 3 stars. This book was one of those books where it had good points. In fact, I resonated with a lot of what he was saying, and I do think that a key secret to life is to just stop giving a bleep about everything, or not everything, but just a majority of things. I think we put a lot of impact and a lot of weight and a lot of emphasis on things in our life that doesn't need to be so weighted, and I think that that's one of our biggest problems in society, especially this day and age, is we give a bleep about too many things, and it drags us down. We make expectations, and it's okay to like be hopeful and to hope for the best, but it's a whole other thing to make expectations, and I think that that's the overall kind of point of this book. And I do think that a lot of this book had really a good message overall, but it got very convoluted very quickly. I kind of felt like he had a really good point that he wanted to make, right? He had a really good idea for this book, but it wasn't enough to fill up like a 250-page book, so he kind of had to pull some things from other areas to kind of make this book longer, when really this could have been probably like a 100-page book and it would have been fine. So I'm gonna be honest, I'm actually not a huge self-help person in general. I don't find myself resonating with self-help very much, and I think the reason why I'm not a self-help or self-improvement book reader is because they don't impact me. Like, they don't have that lasting impact. Like, I can read it and be like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, I like that. I like that. I like that. But they don't stay with me. Like, I am having a hard time even recalling a lot of the things that he had mentioned in that book because they didn't make an impact. I almost feel like fiction novels have more of an impact on me than self-improvement books. And I think it's because there's nothing gluing me to the words in the book. There's no characters that I'm really feeling for. There's no emotional attachment to these ideas. They're just ideas that they're spouting off to you, and they never stick with me. They never last in my mind. And this is exactly what happened with this book. Yes, I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but it didn't have a lasting impact on me. So I gave this book 3 stars. Another thing that really bothered me about this book, I talked about it in my review of it. This author, and a lot of self-help authors do this because they want to make you believe certain points that they have, so they're willing to do anything for you to believe what they're saying. So a good example of this was at the beginning of this novel, and this almost made me turn the novel off because I was like, I just hate when they do this. But he was talking about Charles Bukowski, and he said Charles Bukowski was an amazing poet and he was really successful. And do you know why Charles Bukowski was really successful? It's because he didn't give a bleep. And I'm like, was it though? Was he a famous poet because he didn't give a bleep? Or are you just trying to give this example to like get your point across? Like, all you have to do to become a famous artist, a famous poet, a famous songwriter is to not give a bleep. Correlation does not imply causation. There's a million reasons why Charles Bukowski probably became a famous poet, and it wasn't just because he didn't give a bleep. So don't pretend that that was the case just to get your point across, just to prove your point, because to me, that's lazy. So the next book is The Couple Next Door by Sherry Lapina, and this book is actually a pretty popular read. I think it's pretty old. I'm not exactly sure, but I saw this at Goodwill, and I didn't realize actually how short this book was, so I was like, hey, cool, I'm gonna buy it. This book was okay. I gave it 3 stars. This book was a really interesting plot line, and it kept me invested. I was really curious the whole time. So this book is basically about this couple, and they decide they're gonna go right next door to their friend's party, and they're gonna leave their baby in the crib. They have like a monitor in there, and they carry the monitor with them right next door, and literally the houses are like connected. They're so close to their neighbors that they're like connected. I don't know what that's called, but not like a duplex, but kind of like a duplex. And they're taking turns checking on their baby every half an hour to make sure the baby's okay. Well, while they're at their party, the baby gets kidnapped. And through this whole story, you're trying to figure out who kidnapped the baby and how it happened. And it's a really interesting story. I think the overall twist and the overall plot is really interesting, and I like how it unfolded. But I felt like this book was pretty generic. It kind of had a very generic vibe about it. The characters seemed very generic. Like, these characters could have not even had names, and I probably would have felt the same way about the characters. But it was still interesting. Like, I still enjoyed it, but it just felt generic. Like, that's the best word that I can use to describe it. One thing that bothered me about the end of this book was, this is gonna spoil it. How can I say this without spoiling it? Like, I hated the person who I found out was the kidnapper. And literally this person got off completely cold turkey. They didn't even get arrested. Nothing happened to this person. And I'm like, you literally kidnapped a kid. You literally made like the worst decision ever, yet nothing happens to you? It makes no sense. And it was kind of annoying because I think the author was trying to get you to kind of like this character, but I like did not like this character. I was like, you're a horrible human being, like you deserve jail, you know? And they just got off cold turkey. So that was kind of annoying to me, but still, like, with that said, like, it was an interesting book, and I know a lot of people give this book like 4 or 5 stars. I gave it 3, but I enjoyed it for the most part while I was reading it. And last but not least is a graphic novel called Louisa, Now and Then. So this book is by Carol Morel, adapted by Mariko Tamaki, and this is a book about this woman. And there's a really interesting time travel element in this book, and it's basically her meeting her 15-year-old self and basically having to take care of her 15-year-old self. And this is basically an LGBTQIA plus acceptance novel. It's about her accepting herself, about society accepting her, and kind of the progression of society over time and how acceptance has gotten a lot better in the future versus the past. It's a very interesting book. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was really well done. I was really into it, and I think that it had some really interesting concepts, and it really had me considering what it would be like to hang out with my 15-year-old self. Like, what would it be like to like hang out with your 15-year-old self? What would I think of myself at that age? Would I feel the need to take care of myself? Would I get annoyed with myself? It's a very interesting thought to have. So I actually thought this was pretty good. I wouldn't say the artwork is amazing. It's very cartoony. It's not my favorite art in a graphic novel, but it's not bad. It's just not my favorite. But I actually liked the story. I thought the story was pretty well done, and I was pretty invested in it. I thought it was really interesting, so I highly recommend this. I thought it was pretty good, and I gave it 4 stars. So that is it, you guys. That is it for my wrap-up. These are all the books that I read from my last video to the end of December, and then I will do all the books from January and February in an end of February wrap-up. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know if you have any questions about these books. I'll be glad to answer as many as I can. This video is probably like 30 minutes, but that's just how my wrap-ups are, okay? So anyways, I will talk to you guys in my next video. I hope you have a fabulous day, and I'll talk to you soon.